Photographs are kind of strange when you think about it. We often take pictures to capture noteworthy things in our life. A birthday party, an awesome location in nature, or adorable cat, a long overdue meetup with a friend. These moments are fleeting, but by pressing a button, we're able to create a copy of them. Moments that weren't meant to last forever are in turn preserved indefinitely. It's a rather powerful concept. Our photographs will exist longer than we will, and they're usually created on a whim. That's kind of why they're magical in some ways. And while our photographs mean a lot to just us, sometimes our photos become more than just a treasured memory. Sometimes they have the ability to rewrite history, and one set of photos has become so legendary that they have been sought after for almost 100 years. Their contents possibly showcasing one of humankind's most monumental achievements, and capable of changing the history books if ever found. This is the tale of a camera quite literally frozen in time from 1924. It's no surprise that humans have always been drawn to challenges, and once they finally overcome a challenge, they often set their sights on another one. It's a repeating pattern in some ways. Thrill seekers or athletes often ask, what's next? And each time they feel like they can only go up. So they focus on the next biggest and best thing, always trying to one-up their previous accomplishment. Oh, this mountain's absurdly difficult to climb? Why not try climbing it with no rope or safety net? But at some point, you reach the greatest challenge you will ever face. Sometimes there isn't something bigger and better. And if you're an extreme mountain climber, Mount Everest is that challenge. At over 8,848 meters or 29,031 feet, there isn't a mountain on Earth that is taller in distance from base to height. Well, unless you drain the oceans, and then you have a different story. But Everest is the ultimate destination for a mountain climber looking to overcome death-defying odds. And while many people have reached the summit of Everest over the course of history, that wasn't always the thing. There was a time period when there were no records of humans ever accomplishing the feat. After all, it is exceedingly dangerous. Not only is the climb itself arduously long, but the deadly weather makes it such a risky endeavor. After a certain point on Everest, you're on your own. There's no one you can rely on besides those you have with you. And if something goes wrong, you have to fend for yourself. No one is coming to help you. The truth is, the upper part of Mount Everest is a graveyard. Hundreds of people have died up there, and the morbid part is their bodies will exist in that condition for centuries. Their frozen corpses remain on the mountain, serving as a warning for those passing through that same area. It is too dangerous to try to take the bodies off the mountain, and due to the sub-zero temperatures, the bodies are forever preserved in their frozen state. It isn't uncommon to encounter bodies that have been up there for 20, 30, or 50 years. Some bodies have even become famous landmarks, such as green boots on the main northeast ridge of Mount Everest. The fact that dead bodies serve as makeshift guideposts for fellow humans following in their footsteps is super grim to think about. Then again, it really paints a psychological picture of the state of mind for the climbers passing by those corpses. They've already accepted that death is a possible outcome, but they push on anyways. But they know it can be done because it has been accomplished before. But let's turn back the clock. The year is 1953. Mount Everest, known locally as Sagarmatha by the Nepali people, was something that seemed unsurmountable. Up until this point, there were no apparent records of anyone ever having made it up to the top. However, May 29th of that year, two climbers, Tenzing Norgay and Edmund Hillary, had finally accomplished the impossible. The top of Everest had finally been reached. Tenzing had attempted an earlier expedition in 1952, but had never made it to the top due to oxygen issues forcing them to turn around. And that's one of the huge issues with Everest. Sure, it's piercingly cold and windy, but due to its height, there's another problem: the death zone. At around 8,000 meters or 26,000 feet, the amount of oxygen available within the air is too little for life to carry on. The effects of this zone begin to take a toll on the body of the individual. They could begin hallucinating and start to suffer from weakness. The body actually just kind of stops digesting food at this point due to the altitude too. And overall, the body begins to suppress its functions as the individual ultimately lingers towards death. It's rather terrifying, but also to be expected in one of the most extreme environments on Earth. As I was saying though, the climb of Tenzing Norgay and Edmund Hillary was celebrated to be one of the greatest mountaineering accomplishments. And it certainly is. Everest had finally been conquered and history had been made. These two names would be recorded for all of history as the first two individuals to conquer the challenge that was Everest. However, there's one thing that could potentially disrupt this fame, and that's what I've hinted at the start of the video, the lost camera from 1924. Because the thing is, attempting to climb Everest in the first place took decades. We often celebrate the victors but forget the journey. And almost 30 years before Edmund and Tenzing reached the top, there was another duo who, in some ways, paved the way for others to come after them. And this is the tale of George Mallory and Andrew Irvine. It wasn't really until around the 1920s that Mount Everest became a sort of focus for foreign individuals to climb. The British held several expeditions during this decade, and it was the third expedition in 1924 that the story of two climbers would birth a legend on the mountain. Unfortunately, this legend comes from tragedy. George Mallory, age 37, was a mountaineer who had been on a few different Everest expeditions, whereas Andrew Irvine, age 22, had not. This third expedition was supposed to be the first ascent of Everest to the actual summit, as previous expeditions were used for mapping out the route and had fallen short of reaching the top. And I think that's what kind of makes this all mind-boggling too. People had made it to within 200 meters of the top, but that final stretch was brutal. And when George Mallory and Andrew Irvine attempted this climb, they were really aiming to make it past that final stretch that the others had failed to do. But this is where the mystery begins, because unfortunately, both climbers never made it home. Other climbers had cited seeing them at various points on the mountain, but once they got higher up, it became difficult to track them. Now, there is a lot that goes into the discussion of this and what is believed to have happened, but I'll try to keep it on the shorter side. The problem is that because no one could confirm whether or not they reached the summit, makes it difficult to determine if they died on their way up or if they died on their way down. If they died on their way down, they are indeed the true history makers. And that would mean that Everest was surmounted 29 or so years before Edmund and Tenzing had rocked the world with their climb. So it was known that these two individuals had died somewhere on the mountain, but no one could find them. Their bodies were lost to the cold snowstorms that continued to shape the landscape of Everest. And with their bodies was a camera. It's said that Mallory and Irvine had brought a Kodak pocket camera with them on the expedition to document the accomplishment and any other noteworthy things along the way. If they had reached the top, they surely would have taken a photo to celebrate the accomplishment. But without being able to find the bodies of the climbers, that meant that the camera was lost as well, and thus the almost 100-year mystery of their disappearance began. Almost 10 years later after the fateful climb, it is believed that one of their ice picks had been located. Stuck at around 8,460 meters, this ice pick was the same kind used on their expedition. And this would only be one of several updates that would surface over the years. There were many possible sightings over the next century that hinted at other climbers having possibly seen their bodies. And these sightings eventually helped people find the body of Mallory. In 1975, Wan Hong Bao had reported spotting a dead Englishman, and it was this story that eventually helped people locate Mallory's body. In 1999, 75 years later his body was discovered, and the mystery only grew. When Mallory's body was found, it was searched for clues that could have hinted at how he died and when he died, and there was some interesting discoveries. Unfortunately, no camera was found. However, Mallory had his snow goggles in his pocket. This led people to theorize that he was climbing down at night, which would have possibly hinted at him reaching the summit. Otherwise, there'd be no reason why he'd be descending at that hour. But a more interesting thing is that Mallory supposedly carried a photograph of his wife with him, and this photo was to be left on the summit of Everest once he had reached the top. According to online sources, Mallory's body was in excellent condition. There were other documents derived from his wallet and garments that would hint that the photograph possibly should have been preserved there as well, unless he truly did place it on the summit. But these two things can't really prove that the duo did indeed reach the summit. However, perhaps the camera on Andrew Irvine could, but that's where things are rather morbid, because Andrew Irvine has been missing for almost 100 years. Somewhere out there in that frozen terrain, his body lies buried, preserved in a nice time capsule just waiting for the explorers of tomorrow to uncover it. The thought of Everest being an eternal frozen graveyard still gives me quite literally the chills. I can't imagine being preserved forever in my moment of death, nor the discovery of my body being the secret to solving one of mountaineering's greatest mysteries. If Irvine's body does indeed contain the camera they brought with it, it would certainly rewrite the history books. But while people are still actively trying to find his body, despite the sheer danger a task like that requires, there's no guarantee that the camera will be found, nor will it have the photo we're all wondering about. We won't know until it's found, and until other major clues surface, it could be years before we get another update. But the mystery of George Mallory's and Andrew Irvine's camera has become legend at this point, a tale that is told through Everest and mountain climbing enthusiasts to this day, even being referenced in films, novels, and manga like The Summit of the Gods. It may just be the most sought-after camera in the history of the world. And that, my friends and fiends, is the curious case of the lost camera on Mount Everest. In this instance, the picture would absolutely be worth 1,000 words. But what are some of your thoughts? Let me know in the comments below. Thank you for checking out this video. There are more curious and mysterious videos on the way, so be sure to subscribe to catch the latest. Goodbye!